Jimmy, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on the show today. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. So I want to dive right into it. So the podcast is called Bitcoin Journeys, and the idea behind it is to uncover, people who have come into the Bitcoin space, prominent Bitcoiners like yourself, to discuss how you got into Bitcoin and your story behind it. So I'd love to kind of start off by, well, if you wouldn't mind telling me a bit about your Bitcoin origin story, let's say, or how you initially got into Bitcoin.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I first saw a story on Slashdot in February of 2011, and you can go look up the story still on Slashdot. It was the first headline I saw about Bitcoin ever, and this was 2011. Hadn't been on any other publications or anywhere else that I was aware of. But it said internet only currency Bitcoin has reached dollar parity. So what that was talking about was okay, now it's at $1. We should start paying attention to this thing. But I didn't know what Bitcoin was, so I started going down the rabbit hole. Clicked on the links, did Google searches, tried to find out what it was, how it worked, and all that. And I got a rough sense of what was going on. I was a math major in college and I've been a programmer since I was 9 years old. So I had a decent idea of how it could work. And I also had, the experience of 2008 where with the great financial crisis. So I had a decent idea of the economics of scarcity and why that was important. So I pretty much got, orange pill fairly early. I think it was almost my first instinct was, okay, if this thing's legit, I better be one of the first people to get it and not one of the last. But yeah, that's how I heard about it, and that's how my journey began.
Yeah, awesome. And so, I mean, getting into it in sorry, you said the article was in 2010, right? The slash start article?
2011.
2011. So of course that's, you mentioned dollar parity before it was anywhere near mainstream news. So for you, when you initially got into it, what was your initial reaction? Were you immediately like, wow, okay, this is something big here? Or what was that initial reaction when you read about it and started, delving into it a bit more deeply?
Yeah, I mean, I think initial instinct was if the properties that this thing purports to have is actually true, then it's going to be worth a lot. That was my instinct, but I wasn't sure if the properties that it claimed to have was actually true. The 21 million limit, how it was enforced, and how can you do this thing and make it work and all that. I had no idea because I hadn't studied it at that point. And it would be years before I really understood all of that. But it required some time on my end to really get it. But I think I was convinced at the theoretical thing that it was more so than the actual reality at that point. It was just okay. This thing is making some claims. If the claims are true, then it's definitely going to be something interesting. That was my instinct.
So, how would you then describe, after initially learning about it, what was your journey like afterwards? Because in 2011, nobody really knew or cared much about Bitcoin, I think, right? So maybe it was also less exciting to get involved with Bitcoin as well. So, was it something that then kind of sat on the shelf for you a bit, or is it something that as soon as you discovered it, you kind of kept going down the rabbit hole?
Yeah, I mean, initially it was exciting for me, but like no one really shared my enthusiasm, right? Like I remember I was at a startup. I told my co-founder about it. I told my wife about it. I told some other people that were in the co-working space about it. Nobody was excited. They were like, "Oh, okay," and they just like, and it's hard, like sort of trying to keep going on your own. And I wanted to buy some, but my wife was like, yeah, it sounds kind of sketchy. And I was trying to find the right way to buy it. Like really, the only way you could do it at that time was go through Mt. Gox exchange in Japan, right? Like it's like, okay, that just sounds way too complicated. I actually got the process started, but I didn't follow through with it because it was like very complicated. You had to use a money transmitter to get the money into the Mt. Gox account in Japan and all this other stuff. And setting all that up with your bank account and everything, it was just too much. So I just said, forget about it for a while. Um, and it didn't hit my radar again until that summer. And summer of 2011 was when we had like our first real bull market. And then it went from about $1 to $30 and back down to like $2. That was like our first real market there. And I still remember like sort of seeing stories about it. I saw a couple of blogs that were asking for donations, for example. Um, there were like a lot of just people sort of talking about it online at least. And, I had a Bitcoin Talk Forum account at that point, and I was like, okay, well, there's something. And, people were, posting new stories. And instead of like once every 2 weeks, maybe it was like one or two a week now, like articles and stuff like that. And obviously the price going up to 30 was a big part of that. And I still remember Wired's article that year. It was like Bitcoin's dead, right? Like as soon as it crashed to 30. And it was like, okay, all right, so something's going on. And at that time, I had set up some of it, and I think it was after that run up to 30. I was like, okay, I'm gonna buy some now because this thing has legs. It's still around. There's something going on, and I still didn't care to like look too deep into it. But I was like, okay, this is something, and I still had a job. I had stuff to do, but I didn't know anybody that shared my interest. So I didn't really pursue it too deeply, other than maybe check in on the Bitcoin Talk forums once in a while. That was about it. But that was initially like what happened, largely because just so few people really knew anything about it. It was just and it was hard to convince even like coders, hey, like this is something interesting. Because for them it was just like, yeah, that's okay, whatever. Like and they didn't really do anything, or they didn't want to, they didn't want to talk about it or whatever. That was very frustrating for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, understandable. And so when you initially purchased Bitcoin, I mean, I think even now the infrastructure is still very early days, right? In terms of custodying Bitcoin, with hardware wallets, it's a lot more user friendly now, especially compared to probably 2013, 2014. But in terms of when you initially bought it, when you discovered Bitcoin, what was it initially that drew you to it? Like, what was the value proposition that you saw? Because I think people come to Bitcoin for a lot of different reasons, whether it's, pure as an investment, whether it's escaping some type of inflation, whether it's just as a store of value. But for you, when you saw Bitcoin, what was that, spark or aha moment where you're like, okay, wow, this has a lot of value?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing for me was the scarcity, and it was sort of like a human instinct almost. Like hearing about the 21 million made me think, oh man, I better be one of the first, not one of the last people to get in on this thing. And I think a lot of people have that instinct as soon as they hear about anything that is scarce, right? Like one of the easiest sales pitches is, hey, there's limited quantities of this, and you better get it before it runs out, that sort of thing. And I knew that if it could be enforced sort of at a code level, that it's that it would be a very strong thing. And I recognized at that point like the utility of digital stuff, which I don't I think a lot of people that are in economics didn't really get, at least at that time, like this idea that digital things can have value. So that tripped up a lot of like the people that understood the economics aspect. The digital part sort of tripped them up, and for a lot of people that were coders like me, it was the economic stuff that tripped them up because they were like, oh well, what do I need it for, right? Like they didn't really understand that scarcity itself is very valuable. So for me, I feel very fortunate because I happen to have both of those things. All right, like I had the economics understood well enough, at least to recognize this as something valuable, and the sort of like being having been a coder for a long time at that point, it was already something that I was like, okay, yeah, this could definitely work. Those were critical for me to really really get that Bitcoin was valuable. Now, like that's not to say that I thought it would always work and that it would be an immediate success overnight. If that was the case, I would have put all my money into it. I clearly didn't. Um, and that was something that I think came later, and I think that's like sort of the normal journey for a lot of people is that you get intrigued and you buy a little bit, and then that induces you to go learn more about it. And as you learn more about it, then you you become more convicted, and then you buy more, and so on. And that was kind of the journey for me. It started small, but it grew.
Yeah, no, definitely. And when you started looking into Bitcoin and when you started investigating it, you mentioned the scarcity as a big value proposition. Flash forward now, we're in 2024. 13 years later. Um, are there elements of that value proposition that have either not changed but maybe been added to? I think nowadays, obviously, we're living also in a much more digital society, global society. Along with that, we have governments who are very overarching, and lots of, I think, overarching things that for me add to the value proposition of Bitcoin that maybe weren't as much there 10 years ago. But what for you, if anything, has changed or been added to that value proposition for you when it comes to Bitcoin?
Yeah, I would say that yeah, the main thing uh, that I remember changed was, at least early on, the main narrative was around Silk Road, right? Like darknet money. That was sort of like the main narrative from 2011, 2012, 2013. It really wasn't until Ross Ulbricht was arrested in 2013, to some degree for a few years after that really, okay, yeah, this thing is savings. And really it was Safeteen's book, the Bitcoin Standard, that really made it clear to everybody this is way different. So I think in that sense, the narrative around Bitcoin has changed several times. Mostly around that, and we've had a lot of fights over it. Honestly, even in 2013, people were like, "Oh, this thing's dead. If you can't use it to pay for drugs on the darknet, what good is it, right?" Like it's and that narrative shift actually coincided with major bull market. Similar thing happened in 2017 with like the Bitcoin Cash hard fork. So many people then still thought it was all about payments and making sure that everyone could get a payment in and so on. And we're to some degree we're still fighting about that today. But that I think shift was the major one, where a lot of people thought it was for payments, and really it's a really good savings vehicle, and that's what people really need, is the ability to exchange with yourself essentially in the future, and that's been interesting to watch, because I think for a lot of people, especially early on, they thought of it as a plaything, and a lot of people were in it in 2011. They got out like like during the run up to 30 or whatever, and never bought in again, right? Like there's a lot of people that sort of have those stories, and in a sense, like, a lot of people, sort of like dream about like being the guy that bought the pizza for 10,000, or like, got 10,000 bitcoins for the pizza or whatever. Um, I actually think that would be one of the worst things that could have happened to you if you didn't really understand it. Cause a lot of those people had like 10,000 Bitcoin in 2010 or late 2010 or whatever. And then they like sold it like once the money tripled or quadrupled or whatever. They're like, "Oh, I made like 500 bucks." Yeah. Yeah, man. Like that's awesome. And then they never went back into it because they never understood it. Um the people that actually understood it helped. And there were just so few of those people. You have to understand, like, most people did not understand Bitcoin. And it's only after 13 years of a lot of pain, a lot of discovery, a lot of analysis, a lot of books and things like that, that really people understand it now. And, like, for a lot of people that were early, they actually end up doing terrible, right? Like if you imagine if you had like 1,000 Bitcoin at some point, right? And you lost it in some scam, or you bought an altcoin, or you did like cloud mining, or bought an NFT or something, like you would not be very happy with yourself, and you would probably be very depressed. And in fact, that's what a lot of these people are, is they like hitch their wagons to the wrong thing. And that's unfortunately the fate of so many people early on. And like, you know count your blessings, like, that you didn't end up like one of those people, because the vast majority of them that did get in early ended up like that.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, and I think that's sometimes a common misconception of like, maybe people who did get in early on and people who have managed to, hold throughout the this time period, is like a lot of people I think may think that they're lucky, or that they just got lucky, made a right bet, but I think the people who especially have held for a long time, I mean, you know this more than anybody, right? It's not easy because Bitcoin is incredibly volatile. It goes up a crazy amount, but it also goes down a crazy amount. And the only people who hold through that are the people with conviction, the people who know what they're holding and the fundamental value that it brings to society, right? And so I don't deem that lucky, because for me, that requires a lot of research, a lot of, learning into what it is that you're holding so that you can, hold through those cycles. And so what would you say in your time in Bitcoin have kind of been maybe some of the biggest lessons or lessons that stand out to you about these different cycles and holding Bitcoin, and just your perspective on, like, I'm sure people have maybe called you crazy for not selling earlier when Bitcoin was at 70K, or anything like that, right? So what are some of the lessons that you take with you as you've gone through this journey?
Yeah, I mean, like, it is really hard to hold, especially if you're not in a community. And and that's the thing, like, early on, for most people, like, you're gonna be the Bitcoin guy in your group, right? Like, like most of your family and friends, they know very little about it. They, like, if you tell them about it, they're like, "Oh, you need to sell, right? Like, you've already made so much money. You need to sell and cash out now," and so on. And yeah, I mean, I've been told that so many times by so many people, right? That didn't know what the heck they were talking about. But that stuff affects you, because we're all social animals, and you don't want to look crazy, right? Now, I think, sort of developed like a layer almost of indifference to a lot of those people, and it took me a while to develop, right? Like, around 2013, I still remember, like, my boss at the time was like, like, Bitcoin's at 250. You need to sell. You need, like, yeah, I mean, like, how much more can this thing go up? You've held it since, whatever. Like, why are you holding? Like, dude, it's like, there's no investment that goes up this much or whatever. And, you know, I mean, he was my boss, right? An authority figure in a sense. And it was like, oh man, like you get a little doubt in your mind, right? And it's stuff like that that you need to sort of like build up a resiliency to. Now, it's a lot easier today because you have like these communities online and you can go to Bitcoin conferences and people can talk about it. I think one of the best things that I did was start going to the Bitcoin meetup here in Austin in 2013. Like a lot of those people ended up becoming like altcoiners or whatever. But it was really like a good way to meet people that thought the same way, and you know they had sort of like an economics background. I brought more of the technical. I can explain to them various things. But like hanging out with the right people, like you know, like there's a saying, you're the average of the five of your closest friends, and if they all think Bitcoin is crap, it's going to be very, very hard to hold. And that's something that I've learned over the years. Like a lot of people, you know, go into altcoin territory and stuff. A lot of the early people were very suggestible, which is why they bought Bitcoin in the first place, right? It's like, oh yeah, this is something new. I don't know much about it, but I'm going to buy it because I trust this person. Well, if you're like that and don't really develop conviction or don't have really any thoughts of your own, you're just sort of like trying to go where the tide is going or where the crowd is going and so on. All of those people, without exception, ended up in altcoins, right? Like because hey, there's this other thing, there's this new one, and you know, here's Feather Coin and Barbecue Coin and Factum and whatever. And yeah, I mean, like most people don't know what any of those things are, but these were all coins in 2013, 2014. All of them left. All of them ended up in altcoins, and you know, I mean, this is kind of where you end up if you don't actually know or develop conviction on your own. And you know, I counted a major blessing that I did develop that conviction because I knew something about economics, I knew something about the technical stuff, so I was in the right position to really kind of understand it and develop that conviction on my own. Most people, that's very, very difficult. And I mean, it's a lot easier now, but it's hard even now, right? Like you talk to like your mainstream normie, and you're like, yeah, I've been holding Bitcoin since 20,000, and they're like, what? Like you should sell now, right? Like, and they don't understand what's going on, and you know, you try to explain Federal Reserve to them and inflation or whatever, and their eyes glaze over. This is kind of what you have to deal with, is that we're in sort of like a social environment where you know the everything is, you sound crazy, and everyone thinks you're crazy, and you kind of have to be okay with that. That's what it really means to be a holder, is sort of like resisting these attempts by other people to tell you that you're crazy, right? Like, and to not be convinced of it. It's sort of like almost like a stubbornness to and being immune to their suggestions. And this is why we also have like lots of fights in the Bitcoin community, because you select for that in the end, because the people that have stayed in Bitcoin have sort of like a conviction on what it's supposed to be and what it is, and they're not that suggestible, right? They're not as prone to be affected by propaganda, unlike altcoiners, for example. They're very suggestible, very much influenced by propaganda. Bitcoiners, not so much. It's going to be very hard to get them off of Bitcoin because they understand it, they get it, and they've developed that conviction. So you know, that would be the main lesson. Is conviction is hard to develop and it's slow. Um, but you know, like it's worth getting, because if you know the truth about something, it's you know, you have an advantage over the market, over a lot of people that think they know what they are, and especially in a society where like expertise is so valued or so esteemed by so many people. They're like, oh, I'll leave it to the experts. Like Paul Krugman tell me how evil Bitcoin is. You know, or even if you're a libertarian, let me just listen to Peter Schiff and what he's saying about gold or what, and not Bitcoin. Like that's the worst place to be. You need to do the work yourself. And And that's something that a lot of people honestly are not confident enough doing, because we grow up in, K through 12, like listening to authority, and you're graded on how well you comply and so on. It goes against everything that we learn in a fiat society. And, you know, exercising those muscles of like sort of um, you know, examining beliefs from first principles and building up your own value system and things like that. That is hard. That is hard work. And I mean, this what schools used to teach. They don't teach that at all. And instead they've taken the shortcut to compliance and so on. But that's the main lesson for me.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of incredible points there, which I couldn't agree more with. And it's exactly like you said, right? Conviction takes effort and time to build. You don't just get conviction by listening to what your friend says once and then believing what they say, right? You have to do the work yourself to understand the technology, because Bitcoin is very complex, and it goes beyond just the technical computer science aspect. It goes into economics, it goes into history, it goes into a lot of different aspects. And um, I actually just saw a conference where someone mentioned that, like, it's good that people think you're crazy when you talk about Bitcoin, because at the point when it becomes normal and people just accept that, Bitcoin is what it is, then yeah, there probably also isn't much, well, room for growth, right? And so I think it's a big opportunity and unique opportunity for all of us who are kind of putting in the time to learn about it, to get that conviction. And right now we're in 2024. We just had the halving about a month ago, and naturally, if we look historically, right, this tends to be a time when a bull market is likely. So, because you also touched a bit on altcoins, I want to talk with you about that as well, because naturally, I also have a lot of friends who then come into the space, and I tell them about Bitcoin, and the first thing they tell me is, "Oh yeah, I invested a bit in Bitcoin, but I also bought this coin and that coin and yada yada yada," and it hurts a bit, because you're like, okay, well, sure, you need to do that, because I feel like almost that's like a just a trial you have to go through, I guess. But what I want to know from you is, what is your simple explanation for why it is Bitcoin and everything else is a shitcoin? How do you explain that to someone that doesn't really understand the fundamental concepts behind it?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing I would say that to someone like that is, what's the difference between centralized and decentralized? And that's the thing that that most people don't understand, is that if it's centralized, then it's controlled by somebody, and if it's controlled by somebody, then you don't really own it, right? Like, you're really sort of like at their pleasure. And this is the case with the dollar. If the bank decides to close your bank account, you really have very little recourse, right? I mean, especially if the government says you're like a kiddie pornographer or something, then you have no access to your money whatsoever. You spend that money with the permission of government, with the permission of the bank. Um, and that permissioned spending is what is caused by the centralization of it. If somebody controls it, then they can do that, and the banks control all the payment rails, at least digitally and so on. The government controls, or at least the Federal Reserve controls, the supply of money and so on. So there's many levers of control around it, and it's centralized in many different ways. The difference between Bitcoin and altcoins is that Bitcoin is decentralized. It has no controller. Every altcoin has a central controller, and you could go through the list. I mean, especially like anything in the top 10. Like what's Ethereum? What's controlled by Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation? Binance, it's controlled by CZ and the Binance Corporation. Ripple, it's Brad Garlinghouse and the Ripple Foundation. Like, it's so obvious who controls it, and they get to decide whatever it is that they want to do, and you really have no recourse if they do something that you don't like, or if they decide to seize your funds and so on. The example I like to give is the Poly network hack, quote unquote. Right? This was the Poly network. I think this was a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago. They had 600 million in their bridge, and it was like a bridge from one coin to the other or something like that. But essentially, it was $600 million worth of tokens that got stolen. And the Poly Network people said, okay, like you stole this, even though it was really a flaw in their smart contract, whatever. Like it, and it really isn't a hack as much as it is good lawyering, right? It's like I found this escape clause, and I found a way to get out of it, and no one like audited that thing enough to figure out this flaw. Um, it was $600 million, and the Poly Network people went on Twitter and said, "Guys, whoever stole this money, you should return it because no one is going to mine a transaction that transfers this anymore, right? Like we've told all of the miners, all of the exchanges that if you come into this money, then to freeze it, you're going to be doxxed and you're going to get in a lot of trouble and so on." And of course, the Poly Network, the quote unquote hacker, actually like started negotiating with them after that because they realized this was true. Right? It's completely centralized, and only with the permission of the Poly Network people would you be able to actually get value for these things. So they started negotiating and agreed to return the money in exchange for $500,000. And that's what happened. So $600 million worth of tokens, and the hacker got $500,000. So if you do the math, that's about 99.9% of the value of the Poly Network token was contingent on the Poly Network administrator's permission, right? Because he had $600 million worth of tokens. He essentially sold it for 500,000. 99.9% of it, of the value of that, was contingent on the permission of somebody else. And that's really the difference. Every token is like that except Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is very unique in that regard. And this is something that every VC, every altcoin founder wants to sort of like uh, make very muddled, right? Like the difference between centralized and decentralized. You'll hear phrases like, "Oh, decentralization is a spectrum," right? Like we're working towards it. You either have a single point of failure or you don't, right? You either need permission from somebody or you don't. And if you need permission, then it's centralized. That's it. And the fact of the matter is, you need permission in all of these other systems except Bitcoin. It doesn't require you to upgrade to any hard fork or anything like that. You can exchange it at any point. You can do it peer to peer without any centralization in the middle, and everything else. And that's the big difference is that Bitcoin is decentralized. All this stuff is centralized.
Yeah, very well said. There's a lot of strings we could pull on there, but in the interest of time, I'm curious because, as I mentioned, we are in 2024. The halving just happened. What are your, just what is your overall feeling with Bitcoin as it is today, and where you see it going within the next, let's say, 5 years?
Hmm. Well, I mean, where it is today is it has a lot more adoption than 2011, I'll tell you that. And even a lot more adoption than the past in like 2020 or something like that. I think the last 4 years of just sort of absolute craziness that has gone on in the world, and the inflation that came out of it, I think has a lot of people asking questions, and a lot of them are looking at stuff like Bitcoin and saying, okay, well, how does the money work? So they're starting to ask the right questions, and they're starting to come to some conclusions, and enough people are in that realm that I think adoption is going to grow by leaps and bounds. Now, how quickly that happens and how much it happens and so on, I don't really know. And it really does depend to a large degree on how the government acts, and not just in terms of how much money they print. If they continue to have $2 trillion deficits, inflation's just going to go through the roof no matter what. And macroeconomically, it looks like we're in for some period of stagflation where you get high unemployment and high inflation. It's honestly like three or four decades of just absolutely insane monetary policy. where we've been printing like significant amounts of money and exporting the inflation abroad to poor countries. A lot of those poor countries are kind of refusing the dollar at this point, and so you're going to continue to have to pay for sort of the excesses of like the last 40 years, especially the last 20, coming up. And I think we're going to hit some form of stagflation, in which case I think a lot more people turn towards Bitcoin because this is the one thing that is able to sort of resist a lot of that. It sits sort of outside the financial system. Nothing else really does that, right? Like even gold to a degree is controlled by the money printing because they lend out gold that doesn't exist and so on. It's rehypothecated. It's only really 7 gold vaults in the world that have significant amounts of gold and so on. Um, Stocks and real estate are subsidized by loans and money printing and all that stuff. So Bitcoin is the one thing that sort of like sits outside the system, and I think that's what gives it its power. I think a lot more people will come to that. Now there's some level of sort of resistance starting by the government, especially the current administration, where they're trying to put some scare into Bitcoiners. Now, our conviction is one thing when people, our friends and family are telling us we're crazy. It's another level when the government starts, using guns and stuff like that. So there's going to be some level of that. I don't know how much, but like the government at this point is a little bit of a cornered animal. So I don't know how that plays with everything, right? Like if a bunch of Bitcoiners leave the country, right? Because they're like, I don't want to be in a place where they're trying to do stuff like this. Um, then at that point, there's going to be some consequences to the U.S. policy. So, like the next 5 years, I see greater adoption, but also greater resistance.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. It'll be interesting to see how that shapes out. But I appreciate your time. I know we're almost out of time here, but I wanted to close off with just final advice that you have for any new Bitcoiners coming into the space.
Mm. Well, I mean, for new people, like go learn, right? Like don't be convinced just because a few people have told you should invest in it or you like the number going up or whatever. You're going to have zero conviction like later on. And really, the place where you make money in Bitcoin is when you're convicted and everyone else is not. That's the virtue of holding. Um, so that's what you need to concentrate on and make sure you get right because it is very easy to get it all wrong. And end up in altcoin land and swearing off crypto or whatever or becoming a degenerate gambler. Those are all roads that you don't want to go down. The road that you do want to go down is the ability to save and to plan for the future so that you can have a better one. And not just you, but your entire family and whatever kids and progeny and that you might have. Your descendants will be thanking you, and that's really what you have to look towards is study this stuff and then think long term. Those are the two pieces of advice.
Amazing advice. Well, Jimmy, thank you so much for your time. Final question. I know you also just released a new book. So, how can my listeners learn more about that and also just get in touch with you or learn more about it, what it is that you're doing and all of your great work?
I'm on Twitter at Jimmy Song or X now. I have a newsletter, jimmysong.substack.com. Those are the two main places where I say stuff. And I have other accounts on different platforms and I post different stuff to them too. And you can find them all if you're so interested. But yeah, that's where I am. And yeah, I, um, yeah, you can go read my books. You can you can go check them out.
Awesome. Jimmy, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it today.
All right. Thank you.